So let's talk about something hypothetical. The Olympics have just ended and we saw some great athletes at work, and I want to talk about something that nobody really knows the answer to, but we damn sure like to talk about it, and that is the greatest athletes of all time. I'm going to throw some names. I'm going to say why they are in my top 10, maybe why I wouldn't put them, even though I don't like to talk about negative stuff, but it's not really negative, it's just maybe reasoning why I wouldn't put them as the best athlete of all time. Michael Phelps, he just competed in the Olympics, just widened his collection of medals, has the most Olympics medals than anybody ever. He's the best swimmer of all time. But maybe, I don't want to say it's easy, but maybe it's a bit more convenient to get more medals in swimming because there's so many more disciplines and many team events. Even though it's not easy to get Olympic medal in any sport, of course, especially not swimming. But I would put him in top 10 athletes of all time. And swimming is such a basic sport, like it's in our nature. So kind of like running or fighting, swimming is a basic sport. So the best swimmer should be in the top 10 athletes consideration of all time. I wouldn't put him on as number one though. Then we have Roger Federer. In a sport of gentlemen, he has the best numbers, the longest reign. He was a dominant champion. However, he had some flaws in his game, which made me to think I wouldn't put him as my number one athlete of all time. I would definitely put him as top 10 of all time, but not as the greatest athlete of all time. He had some problems on the sand, especially against Nadal, even against some other people, and especially if they were left-handed and a good servers. Then at times he was struggling, but still, best tennis player of all time. All due respect, I love me some Roger Federer, and I mean that's a great accolade as well, being a top 10 athlete. Even though he's just my list, so it doesn't really matter a lot. But hats off to Roger Federer. Wayne Gretzky. Wayne Gretzky played in a sport which was very, very high level at that time already. He was playing, let's say, his prime was in the 90s in NHL, which means it was a modern day hockey. It was already great teams, great players, great individuals, but his numbers stood out. His numbers were better than the best players in classic eras. Like his records are, he was like Will Chamberlain numbers. Will Chamberlain, like he would be playing now. It was like his numbers are so high that there some records will stand for maybe for my lifetime or even more. He was above and beyond everyone else, and best hockey player of all time, no doubt. But he played a sport that it's very congested. I mean, there's not a lot of nations that are actually considered to be world champions. There is Finland, Sweden, Czechs, Slovaks, Russians, and Canada and US. I mean, maybe I left somebody out, but this is a really small portion of the world, the northern globe, that kind of plays this sport on a high level, and maybe that's why I wouldn't put him as the greatest athlete of all time, but definitely for me top 10 athlete of all time. I'll put Alexander Karelin, the greatest wrestler, probably one of the best fighters of all time. He was a physical specimen. He was a workhorse. Just look at his body. I mean, that's years of hard work on it. He was really, really dominant. But he's got that Sydney loss against Roland Gardner, which wouldn't really happen with the old rules, but they kind of changed the rules, so he turned out second, and I don't know. Of course, he was my childhood hero. I wanted him to win, but unfortunately, he didn't. He's top 10 athlete on my list of all time. Not the number one for me. Stephen Redgrave, in a beautiful sport of rowing, one of my favorite sports. Just because you're in contact with nature, you're on the water, you're doing something productive, you're going from point A to point B. On top of that, these guys they're strong, they're endurant, they're great athletes, and mentally strong. And he is the best rower of all time. He's Sir, nevertheless, and hats off to Steve Redgrave. But I wouldn't put him as the greatest athlete of all time. I would definitely put him on a top 10 list, though. I mean, he's got 5 gold medals on 5 different Olympics, I think, something like that. A great man, and he always broke my heart because I was always watching rowing on the Olympics, and we had some great rowers in Slovenia, but Steven, with his teams or alone, was always ahead of us. The next guy I would like to mention will bring a bit of heat, or a lot of people will switch this video off, but I would put him. Maybe I'll name 2 guys that are controversial, but I will put them in top 10 of all time as well. And their names are Carl Lewis and Lance Armstrong. Of course, they are criticized because of their use of banned substances, especially Lance's case, because he was lying about it and had a big controversy about it, and that interview with Oprah and everything. I mean, it was more people know Lance by things off the track than what he did on the cycle, and I just want to focus on that part. I mean, in an era of great cyclists like Pantani, like Ulrich, he was the best of the best, and Tour de France is the greatest cycling event in the world. The best cyclists are there, and he was just in the zone of his own. He was the greatest cyclist. I don't really care what anybody says. I mean, drugs or no drugs, he was the greatest cyclist. And cyclism is such a crazy sport. It's one of the most enduring, one of the most grueling sports you'll see, and these guys train like crazy. I mean, he says now, I just watched his interview not long, maybe this year. He said cycling isn't really that hard because you can even talk sometimes because you're in a group, so you are behind them, so it's kind of easier to cycle. But in his mind, it's not that easy. But if somebody like me would go, or somebody like that's not a good cycler, I mean, he would die. He wouldn't even be able to finish the race. But he's talking about, like, it's not as hard as people are trying to show it that it is. Yeah, if you're a great or super athlete like you are, maybe it's not so hard, and especially mental edge. I mean, cyclists are extremely tough mentally. They are very strong mentally. So I'll put him in my top 10. And I'll put Carl Lewis in my top 10. I mean, Carl Lewis has a great resume, but I got one more guy from athletics, and I think you all know who it is. But I first want to talk about those 2 that are considered the greatest athletes of all time now, Muhammad Ali and Michael Jordan. Now, Ali was a great boxer. He was a dominant champion. He had some great battles. He had a loss and avenged it, and he was amazing, and he made some styles that he changed the boxing, but he also changed the world. He had a great influence, so he was not only a sport icon, he was a cultural icon, and that's why we all consider him one of the greatest athletes of all time and one of the top 2 athletes of all time. Some even voted him as the best athlete of 20th century. I could agree with that without a doubt, but there is one guy that I would put on top of the 20th century and maybe of all time, and that's Michael Jordan. In a sport like basketball. Now, if you saw, I didn't mention anybody from American football or European football. So from we just like football. Even the Americans or the rest of the world, we like football. Our own football, Australian football, Irish football. But football is a sport that everybody loves, and it's highly competitive. The American football is very competitive. That's why there was so many great guys there. European football is very competitive. That's why you got like Maradona, Pelé, Ronaldo, the other Ronaldo. You got Messi now. You got Ronaldinho. You got so many excellent players in the history of this game. But nobody stands out so much that I would put him in my top 10, even though they are all great athletes. but there is basketball behind football. Basketball for me is the second most competitive sport. It's hard just to get into a national team in basketball, let alone to be an NBA star. I mean, there is not even 1% players in the world right now that basketball players in the world now that play in the NBA. It's 300, 400 guys only. They are all elite players. And Michael Jordan, when he played, it looked like he's in a league of his own. Even those 300, 400 elite players, they look like they don't belong in the same class as him. He was so dominant in such a competitive sport. That's why he is the great athlete. And just like Muhammad Ali, he had a great cultural influence as well. Bird and Magic kind of started at the beginning of the 80s, kind of started to make that expansion of the NBA. And then when it went global in the early 90s, Michael Jordan was the poster boy of the NBA. And he was on every poster, on every Kiss jersey, all over the world. If you go to Philippines, Brazil, Russia, or the US, or Antarctica, maybe some penguins are wearing Michael Jordan's jersey, because this guy was just a pop culture sport icon, kind of like Muhammad Ali, only Muhammad Ali for the totally different reasons. But on the field, if you think Muhammad Ali had there was some boxers that were on his level, or they were considered better boxers than him, like let's say Sugar Ray Robinson or Floyd Mayweather right now, or they say like Mike Tyson in his prime, would he beat Muhammad Ali? I mean, even though Mike himself said Ali is the greatest, but there were some people on Muhammad Ali's level. Nobody in basketball is on Michael Jordan's level, in my humble opinion. And if you ask Magic, Bird, Shaq, Kareem, Bill Russell, Dr. J, or late great Will Chamberlain, I mean, if you ask any of those, they will say, any of them except LeBron James, but any of the other people, they will say Michael Jordan is heads and shoulders above everyone else in basketball, and that's why he's the greatest player, the greatest athlete of all time. I told you I'm gonna mention one guy from athletics, and I think you already know who it is, but he with the last Olympics, even though we all know it's gonna happen, we all kind of knew like he's gonna win 100 meters, 200 meters, the 4 times 100 race, and we were kind of watching it, but we knew, like, we just want to see, like, yeah, it's gonna happen, but we didn't really think anybody can compete with him, even after a decade of pure domination. But that's Usain Bolt, and he jumped in my top 3, and I'm not gonna put him ahead of Muhammad Ali and Michael Jordan, but there is one argument where I can maybe make you believe he is above them. He is in a sport that is so primal, like I said about swimming, running. Just athletics alone are so primal, like running, jumping, throwing stuff. Okay, it's a bit more technical, but you need equipment. But jumping, running, sprints, they are so primal. We've been doing it since before we became Homo sapiens. We were already doing this stuff. And there is a royal discipline in athletics, and that's 100 meters. And he is so dominant, even after all these great athletes, Carl Lewis, Linford Christie, Maurice Green, there was so many great sprinters. Kim Collins still running, I mean, Frankie Fredericks, Ato Boldon, so many great athletes. And then there's Usain Bolt, kind of like Michael Jordan, just staying in his zone. And we all watch 100 meters. I mean, my mama watches 100 meters. My grandfather watched 100. Everybody watches 100 meters because it's those 10 seconds, or in his case, less than 10 seconds, that you watch and just see who is the fastest man alive, and in his case, who's the fastest man that ever lived, and that's Usain Bolt. And the only thing that separates him from those two is maybe the cultural effect, since he only goes on scene maybe every 2 years. So the World Championships and then Olympics. Boxers fight 2-3 times a year. Muhammad Ali fought even more. Michael Jordan played 82 games a year, and then playoffs. So sometimes maybe even more than 100 games. Most of the time since he won titles, but Usain Bolt is on the scene every 2 years, so maybe that cultural effect isn't so huge, and his influence maybe isn't so recognized. But I would put him, I won't say any blasphemous right now, but I'll put him as the greatest athlete of the 21st century. I don't think anybody disagrees with me. The fastest man alive, the greatest sprinter of all time, and just an amazing athlete. And it's a privilege to see him run. And he's only 30 years old. He's been dominating for 10 years. So I think he's got another Olympics in him. I know a lot of people are saying maybe not, but I mean, look at the landscape right now. I mean, from like I said, Collins, Tyson Gay is still running, Asafa Powell is still running, Justin Gatlin is still running. I mean, he was second on the Olympics. Those are all guys in his 30s, and he just entered 30s. Maybe in these next days or this week, I think he's turning 30, and he's got 9 gold medals already. So best athlete of 21st century for now, for sure, Usain Bolt. And hats off to him. Hats off to all the guys I've mentioned. I hope nobody will be offended by any statements that I make, but that's just clearly my opinion. It doesn't really matter, but that was my criteria I put. I'm sure I missed some guys out. There were so many great athletes. Yeah, but like I said, greatest athletes of all time.